Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you tonight. My name is Barbara Grosh. I'm the president of the Rochester League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political membership organization. We don't endorse candidates or parties. We work hard to make as many well-informed voters as ready to vote as possible. So we're registering voters and we're setting up Vote 411, our online voters guide, so that you can find out who and what's on your ballot. We organize candidate forums so you can meet the candidates and hear from them. But the rest of the year, when we're not just before an election, we organize educational webinars on important matters of public affairs. And in that light, we have tonight's offering. So I'd like to welcome Kesha James. Kesha is a part of the Antiracist Curriculum Project, which is now based at CCSI. I just discovered that's the Coordinated Care Services Incorporated in Rochester. Let me say a tiny bit about the background of the Anti-Racism Curriculum Project. Shane Wiegand is not able to be with us tonight. He was a fourth grade teacher in the Henrietta Public Schools, and one time he did a lesson, I think it might have been for Martin Luther King Day, and showed some kind of film or pictures, and the kids all went, "Oh, did that happen here? Did MLK come here? Did we have riots here?" And he didn't actually know the answers to all those questions. So he started finding out, and he learned more and more and started making lesson plans and sharing them with his colleagues. And pretty soon he's doing a whole K-12 curriculum, and he's got Kesha as a partner, and they are sharing it all over the state. And that is why we thought it would be great to invite all of the league from all over New York State to hear what kids are going to be able to learn now, because we had these guys do a webinar for us last year, and we just felt like, oh, we didn't know all of this. This is so important. And one of the things I want to mention, and maybe Kesha, you might end up going into more detail about it, is that quite a few of the kids who have gone through the curriculum have then started asking really good questions like, well, why isn't there anything named after so-and-so? And then they come to their principals and say, couldn't we name that path after Antoinette Brown Blackwell? Or, you know, they're coming up with projects on their own, which are fantastic. So that's one of the outcomes of this kind of education. And we're all in favor of that and want to spread the word as wide as we can. So a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel in a day or two. We will send out a link to everyone who's registered, giving the link to the recording, and feel free to share it with all your friends. This is the first of a two-part webinar. The next one is a week from tonight, and it's constructed in Zoom as one event. So if you're on tonight, you can use your same link to get on next week, and you can share that with anyone you want, or just encourage them to register online. The other thing is that we have disabled the general chat, so Kesha will be able to share some websites, and I'll share an evaluation link at the end. But otherwise, we'd like you to put your questions into the Q&A, and both Kesha and I will watch those, and we'll try to make sure that all questions get answered. And closed captioning is turned on. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom web screen. So I think that is all the announcements. I just wanted to shout out to Regina Tillman from, she's our third vice president of the State League in charge of DEI, and she was a huge help in publicizing this. So thank you so much for sharing this around the state. And with that, I'm going to turn my camera off. After Kesha's done presenting, I'll come back in and, oh, Kesha's asking Judy, can we turn the chat back on? Kesha wants people to be able to interact. All right, we should have talked about that.
I apologize, yes, that we didn't. So a big part of this is folks responding in the chat for different parts of the presentation, just like we did with you all. So my apologies for not sharing that.
All right, I think that's going to come on in a minute. So after Kesha's done, I'll come back and help moderate questions and lead discussion. All right, so welcome, Kesha.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here right now. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. And thank you so much, Barbara, for that wonderful introduction. So again, my name is Kesha James. I co-lead the Antiracist Curriculum Project with Shane. So there's Shane right there. And I'll give you just a little bit of background about me. So I was an educator in Rochester City Schools for about 14 years. I'm also graduated from RCSD as a student, and about 7 years into my career as a teacher, I went back and got another master's as a marriage and family therapist. Took a little bit of time off from teaching. I spent some time working in the community, supporting families that experience extreme trauma. And then I came back into schools because I came back to RCSD because I missed being around kids and working with students. I came back as an SEL coach, so social emotional learning coach, and then I supported new teachers that had been hired. And then I just thought I had this bright idea of running my own school. So I went back and got another master's in my admin program and realized very quickly that was not my calling. But I really feel like it was divine timing because I got to meet Shane and go to a training about redlining and racism in Rochester. And it blew my mind what I learned because it wasn't, number one, it was new learning for me. And I had been teaching at that time for probably a good 10 plus years. But then it also helped me understand my family story in a way that I hadn't understood before, where like why when my grandmother came here from Alabama, my grandfather came here from North Carolina, how they met in a redline neighborhood. And so it just started to make a little bit more sense. And I was just like, I have to be a part of this work. And so for the last 3 years, Shane and I have been running this project together. We have left our individual classrooms to support classrooms all across New York State and really thinking about how do we have these hard conversations with students? How do we teach curriculum or history that maybe we didn't learn growing up? And how do we do it in a way where we are being safe with students, that we're making space for how they're feeling, and also really making sure that we're not telling them what they need to think, but we're just facilitating the space and helping them with primary sources and just asking different questions that maybe they hadn't asked in the past. Like, how are we helping our students become critical consumers of their education? And so I'm really excited to dig in today with an example and a piece of one of our units of study. But before we jump into this, I really like to know, how are you feeling in this moment? So if you can do me a favor and take your phone out and scan this QR code, and then just let me know which dog represents how you're feeling right now. Thank you so much. Yep. So when you go ahead and in the chat, just make sure that it says to everyone and not to host and panelists. So if you can do that, so then we can all see that. And if you want to, if you don't feel like scanning that QR code, feel free to just in the chat, let me know which dog represents how you're feeling. I see some twos. Oh no, maybe well, it's a little late to have coffee, maybe some tea. Maybe grab some tea. I see a 4, I see some 1s. Oh, all right. I love it. Some 7s, some 2s. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Some 8s, some 4s. Oh, I'm loving it. Some 6s. I'm sure if you have any dogs, I'm sure this is, they were really happy this weekend. I know everybody was a beautiful, beautiful weekend. Oh, got some 8s, a little tired. I know I almost made some iced coffee and I was like, no, it is too late in the evening to do that. Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I got some 6s, some 8s. I'm so excited for you all to be here. This is just a way that when we do this, especially with students in our classrooms, we're always just making sure we're making space for checking in. How are they feeling? And just letting them know that any way that you are feeling, any dog that you are feeling right now is okay for you to feel that. We're going to jump right in and dig into this unit. So we have curriculum. Thank you for the folks that participated. We have curriculum in a number of grade levels. So from grades 2 through 12, we have different units of study that align with our New York State social studies and ELA standards. And then we also have a half-day SEL PD, social emotional learning, where we're really helping teachers understand the how-to, like, how do you do this? How do you create a safe classroom? Instead of just saying, this is a safe classroom, like, what are the ways that you really start to instill that with your students? So today we're going to be digging into our 4th and 7th grade unit on enslavement and resistance in New York State. I want you to know that this work isn't new, that Shane and I aren't just these two awesome teachers that were like, we just need to do this really great unit of study. We truly are, have the baton passed to us from elders in our community, like Dr. Walter Cooper, who was one of the first African-Americans to integrate the town of Henrietta in Rochester, New York, or Dr. Alice Holloway Young, who was our first Black principal in Rochester. She actually helped to found Monroe Community College and the Urban Suburban Program, or Nancy Padilla and Roberto Burgos. They were student activists in Rochester City schools, and they are one of the reasons that we have bilingual education in RCSD today, because Puerto Ricans were coming into Rochester in large numbers, and if students didn't speak English, they were being put in special ed classrooms because there were no teachers that spoke Spanish that were there to serve these students. And so these students saw the inequities there, and they decided, even with the power that they had as students, the very little bit of power they had, they decided to come together and to fight back. And then why we're here today is these are 4 of the 30 youth that we've worked with from a group called Teen Empowerment here in Rochester, New York, where they've come together, they work and they find they do activism in their communities and really starts to ask questions about the injustices. And so they're the reason that I'm actually a part of this project, because when Shane went there about 4 or 5 years ago, they demanded that this be taught in Rochester City schools. And I went to one of the first trainings there. And so we've been able to pay them to interview some of the elders. They've actually gone through all of our curriculum, letting us know what's good, what needs to be taken out, what needs to be added, because we know how important it is for student voice. And this is who we do this for students, right? And so it's so important that we're hearing what they want to learn about, what questions they have, and the things that they're actually interested in. I agree. It's never too late for coffee. So our model is comprised of these different areas. And so we have restorative practices built throughout social emotional learning. So you'll see kind of just like I checked in with you a few minutes ago, you'll also be able to, I'll have another check-in with you and kind of just show you what we do with students. Again, everything is inquiry based. We don't tell teachers or students what to think. We put primary sources in front of them, and then they get to start to ask questions about these primary sources. And then slowly we start getting closer and closer after a couple of days in the unit to getting close to answering our inquiry question. And each unit has an inquiry question. And then every single unit ends with a bias towards a call to action. We don't want students to just learn about their history. We want them to feel empowered to say, oh, somebody that looks like me saw this problem in the community and they got together and they decided to do something about it. If they could do it, so can I. So we've had tons of really awesome student civic action projects that have come off of students learning this curriculum and feeling empowered to do something about this in our community. And so I'll end our time today with just sharing about one of those stories in our community in Rochester. All right, so our learning target for our time together will be, I can explore how enslavement impacted my community in New York State, how people have resisted and responded, and consider how knowing the history of enslavement and resistance in New York State informs how we respond to racism today. We have some group norms, and I'm just going to ask, I'm going to read this to you all, and then I'm just going to ask you to just reply in the chat. So the ones we have are speaking your truth using I statements. I'm going to ask you to stay engaged as much as you can. I know it's a little bit late on a Monday night. Be aware of your intent and know your impact. So as we're sharing in the chat and sharing amongst each other, we just want to be respectful of that space. And if we do say something that maybe causes harm, we want to own our impact. If somebody brings that to our attention, one of the ways we can respond is, can you explain a little bit more about what you meant by that? Or thank you for saying that to me. Let me take some time to think about it and get back to you. I'm going to ask you to accept and expect non-closure. This is normally a 3-hour professional development that I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of in this, hour or so that we have together. I'm going to ask you to maintain that learner stance and remain open, step up and step back. So if you're somebody like me who maybe gets a little overwhelmed with things and maybe gets quieter and doesn't participate as much, I want to encourage you to step up and maybe pop some things in the chat. If you're somebody who maybe gets a little anxious and talks a little too much, we want you to notice that as well. And then we're going to ask you to take a step back and make some space for other folks. Respect that we're all in different places on our journey. We want to be curious and open. And then I just want to open it up in the chat if there's anything else that you all need in order to feel safe yet challenged in our conversations together today. So feel free, if there's something that you want to add to this list, feel free to pop that in the chat and then I will add it on this list. Land the plane. What's that mean? I don't think I understand. I don't know what that one means. Oh, like be concise. Got it. So, okay, so get to the point, share the air. Perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will definitely being empathetic. All right, awesome. So let me put that on here as well. So we've got be empathetic. I really hope no one plans on biting today. Let's see. So be concise. Yes, because we do only have a little bit of time today. Awesome. All righty. So if I can have you in the chat, thank you so much. Just let me know that you're going to agree to these group norms. So if you can just put in the chat, I agree. Hold yourself and me accountable throughout our time together. And I just want to say, excuse me, because I'm going to say we a lot because I always do this with Shane. And so I don't want you to think I'm talking about the multiple voices in my head. It really is. Shane and I normally do this together. So I'll probably say we quite a bit. And while folks are doing that, I just want to point out this quote that we have on the screen from James Baldwin that says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So oftentimes we haven't learned this history and maybe some of the things I'm going to share today. So we're going to lean into it because there's nothing that we can't change anything if we don't address it, head on. So thank you so much for putting I agree in the chat. Really appreciate it. And now I'm going to have you start to continue to interact with me. So I'm going to introduce you to our day one of our unit. So I don't want you to put this in the chat, but just hold this in your head, okay? So when you hear the word Africa, what's a word, thought, or phrase that comes to mind? So don't put it in the chat, just hold it in your head. Or if you have a little Post-it or a little piece of paper, you can jot it down, but just hold it in your head, a word, thought, or phrase when you hear the word Africa. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. Thank you. All right, so a few interesting facts about Africa. Africa is the second largest continent. If you take a look, Spain, United States, China, Eastern Europe, India, Japan, the UK, so many different countries can actually fit on the continent of Africa. Africa has 54 countries. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do this thing called a zoom in, zoom out. And so I'm going to show you an image. I've broken it up into 4 different pieces. And then I'm going to slowly reveal piece by piece to you. So in the chat, you're just going to hold these 3 questions in mind. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What can you infer? And nothing is too simple. So you can point out a color you see, you can point out a question you have about something, and you'll pop that in the chat. So, you ready? I can't see you, but I'm assuming everybody's like, yeah, we're ready. All right. So let's take 30 seconds. So don't hit enter yet. Just what do you notice? What do you wonder? Take about 30 seconds and we'll all hit enter at the same time. So just type, don't hit enter. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Don't hit enter yet. Take about 10 more seconds. Three, two, one. Go ahead and hit enter. Let's see. Is this Egypt? Is it a bird? Is it a stone? Number of countries? Is it a partial drawing? What's the rest look like? What's missing? Looks like a drawing or a building, pastel colors. Neutral tones throughout. Is it a couch? Ooh, greatness or suppression, noticing colors. Yeah, what is it? Is that a distorted face there? What's the rest look like? Is that a pot of pasta sauce there? I don't know. Is that a building? Is that a couch? Is that a kidney bean right there? Is it steps? Castle? A throne? A king's chair? Love the notices wonders. Oh, someone said, is it home? All right. What about now? You don't have to wait the 30 seconds. You can just pop it in the chat. What do you notice and wondering now? What are those red lines? Is that an apple or a pedestal from the last one? So again, for this one, go ahead and just pop it in the chat. What do you notice and wondering now? Whose feet are those feet? Someone says, feet. Is it a throne, black feet, laser security system? I thought about laser security system and no one's ever said that since we made this unit. So I'm so glad someone's finally saw the laser security system that I saw. Noticing feet, is that a mosque? Wondering about that. It's a human. Thinking about a seated figure, someone sitting on a cushion, elephant, are they animal feet? Is it a throne or a statue? Pillow, clothing loosely wrapped, some bare feet, string. Oh, is that a hand with fingers? Who drew this? That's a great question. Is it something, it's a drawing? How long ago? Slouching on cement, maybe? Is it a draft from the artist? Like I could tell we got some artists in the room. Nice, nice. Ooh, if they're dancing, all right. Is that a 7? Oh, these are some great notices and wonders. How about now? What's the full picture? Yeah, by this time, kids are like out of their seat, like, just show me the whole thing. What type of tool was used? Is that a scepter? Oh, is it an emperor? Ooh, ruler, king. What language is that? So we're seeing some writing, we see some printing. Is it East Africa? Yes, it looks like the word rich is on the screen. Some kind of object. Oh, the king of the sun, maybe. Looks like, is that a portion of a crown that we're seeing here? Is it a page of a book? Ooh, that has not come up before. Kingdom. Oh, it looks like Arabic writing. A ruler. Oh, part of a tapestry, maybe. Okay. How about now? Person that was revered. Nice. Is it a king? Gold. Definitely a king or a ruler. See a crown. Ooh, does that have to do with astrology? King looking at some kind of gold ball, or is it a god? Sun god, maybe? That's a good one. Sun god. Or is it an orb? Yep, that comes up, yep. Ruler, a dynasty in Africa, is symbolic of the world. A scientist or a king. Someone contemplating. Yeah, looks like he's really like focusing on that. Is it a coin? The 3 kings. Oh, I didn't think about that. Looks like it's being very carefully held. A king with a gift, maybe, drawn by a man or an explorer. Does a gold ball represent the sun? I love that. I don't think that's come up before. I love that. Ooh, king of the world. All right, y'all want to see the full image? All right. So how about now, looking at the whole image? Any other notices, wonders, or inferences that you can make about who you think this might be? I saw some folks that already put some inferences in the chat, but who do you think this may be? Got both of his hands occupied. Or what else are you noticing now that you're looking at the full image, or anything else that's popping up? Royalty, African kingdom, like a dark-skinned king. Looks like he's contemplating power. Noticing, yeah, the size of the image compared to everything else. Is that a river at the bottom? Ruler of a nation, some royalty. Hmm. Sophistication. Awesome, awesome, awesome. How about now? This is the Catalan Atlas from 1375. You'll see we put a little arrow so you can see where this part of the image is. Anything popping up now? Seems to be contemplating. Yeah. You know that like this gold road, it's his pilgrimage to Mecca. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Many kingdoms, seeing the wealth, the trade routes. Nice. All right, so some of you had this, so nice job in the chat. This is Mansa Musa, and so this emperor Mansa Musa. So think about the richest person in history at $200 billion, and you may have somewhere close to the amount of wealth that Mansa Musa had in the 14th century. With students, we let them know that the Mali empire was 9 times larger than New York State is today. So if you've heard of Timbuktu, that was a part of Mansa Musa's empire. And then with students, we won't do this today just for time's sake, but with students, we give a little bit of more background about who Mansa Musa was before we go into the rest of our unit. And so we're not going to do this, but I'll show you what we do next with kids. And so that would be like our opening, and then kids will work together and do a 3-2-1 partner activity, where they would look at these beautifully rich images all across the continent of Africa. They would write down 3 things they noticed, 2 things they wonder, and then an inference that they can make about Africa. And so taking a look at just some of the mosques that were built under Mansa Musa. This was a university that was attended by students all across the world. They would send scholars here, and then they'd go back to their other countries. They had one of the world's largest libraries at the time. And then we always pair it with the geographic reasoning of where it's located on the continent for students. And so I'm just going to click through these next ones so that you can see. This is my favorite picture here. It's just, I just love it. Thinking about Great Zimbabwe, so medieval cities, or even more current day cities like Johannesburg, South Africa. And then we close this day with asking students, well, now when you hear the word Africa, what's a word, thought, or phrase that pops in your mind? So I will have you pop this in the chat. So now that you've seen that zoom in, zoom out of Mansa Musa, you saw some of the images, and I know we have a bunch more, but I just wanted to show you just a few. What would be maybe something now when you hear the word Africa that you would think? So thinking about maybe a rich history or culture. So different advanced civilizations and things like that. So yeah, so this would be the way that we would close our day 1. And I should have said this in the beginning, but all of our units are 5 to 6 day units that students can, that you can interact with students. When I taught it in my classroom, it took me about 2 weeks. I took about 10 days. I had the flexibility, and my kids were so into it that I just made space for them to just keep going. And so we were really, really intentional with starting with Africa in day 1. So we really don't even mention the word enslavement until day 2, because you never start a people's story at their lowest point. And we wanted to always make sure that we're starting with richness and beauty and culture. When we're working with students, we want to start with that asset-based approach, and then we can talk about what happened, as people were brought to the Americas. But it was very, very intentional for our team when we built this unit to really make sure we were starting with beauty, with culture, with royalty. And honestly, I heard of Mansa Musa maybe, I would say, within the last 10 years or so. So it wasn't something that I remember learning about in school at all. All right, so this is what we call now our inquiry question for days 2 through 4 of the unit. So how did Black people and their allies resist the horrible conditions of enslavement in New York State? Because I don't know about you all, but for me, when I went to school in RCST, Rochester City Schools, we didn't talk about enslavement in New York State. We talked about enslavement in the South. It was a Southern plantation thing. We were better up here. We had the Underground Railroad. We had Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. We had abolition up here. I didn't learn the story of enslavement in New York State. And so it was really important for us, especially when we look at the standards for social studies, that we're focusing on what happened right here in our community, in our community's history. So in order to do that with kids, we start with some vocabulary. And so we shifted from slave to enslaved person. And we're not saying the word slave is wrong, but we want to just, again, shift to more culturally responsive language. And so no one chooses to be a slave. It is something that's done to you. And so our definition is an individual who's forced to work for no pay and without freedom. And then our example, we always pair it with a local example. So this is Austin Stewart. He was enslaved in Sodus, New York. He ended up escaping, and then he came to Rochester, and he was the first Black business owner that we had in Rochester. On the flip side of that is enslaver versus saying master. Master can have a positive connotation sometimes, where enslaver was a choice. So these individuals chose to enslave other human beings. And so our definition is an individual who buys and sells human beings and forces them to work for no pay. Example is Daniel Penfield, who enslaved African Americans right here in the town of Penfield in Rochester. He forced them to work for no pay at his forced labor camp. And yet this plaque or this statue commemorates Daniel Penfield, but it has no mention of the enslaved Africans that actually turned that mill and generated the wealth for this community. And what Ed Build found in 2020 was that the school district border between Penfield schools and RCSD is the most segregated school district border in all 50 states. And I'll say that one more time. So in 2020, Ed Build found that the school district border between RCSD, so Rochester City Schools, and Penfield Schools is the most segregated school district border in all 50 states, and segregated by race and class. So when we think about, we often hear the term runaway, and we've shifted to freedom seeker, because we know that runaway has that negative connotation, and it's not wrong to seek your freedom. And so our definition for that is in African Americans who bravely risk their lives to escape from enslavement. So this is Thomas James, who was enslaved in Canajoharie, New York. He ended up escaping and going to Canada. Then he came back to Rochester, and he actually built the AME Zion Church that still stands today on Favor Street in Rochester. It was a spot on the Underground Railroad, and actually Frederick Douglass had his newspaper in the basement of that church in the very beginning. And then last but not least is we have allies. And so someone who stands with or advocates for individuals or groups other than their own. So Amy and Isaac Post were white allies who ran a station on the Underground Railroad in Rochester. So if folks are from the Rochester area and you've heard of Hochstein School of Music, that was their home. And so if you've ever been in there, you can kind of look at like some of the floors and stuff like that, and you'll see like there's different doors and stuff like that. So that was again used as a station on the Underground Railroad, and again showing the students the word ally. Alrighty, so this is a pretty powerful graphic. We're not going to show it today because I want to get you into digging into this a little bit more. But this is an image from Slate Magazine, which shows over 315 years, the 20,000 plus voyages from Africa, where they left the continent and then where they landed in the Americas. You can actually, and I'll make sure that Barbara has this slide deck so we can share this out afterwards, but you can actually click on these dots and you can pull up the ship's manifest if you want to and dig into this a lot more. And so with students, what we usually do is we'll show them this, whether we show them the image, the graphic, or we'll just have this printed out, and we have them do what's called a gallery walk. And so we have these posters that get set up all around the classroom, and we have these images that are put on there. We give kids sticky notes, and then they just write down, what are they noticing? What are they wondering? And really important, any feelings that are coming up for them. And so we're going to attempt to do this digitally. And I've got some tools just in case it doesn't work for you, but we're going to try to do this. And so in just a second, I'm going to put a link in the chat, and you are going to notice that you'll see what's called a whiteboard. And let me just put it in the chat and see if I can pull it up for you all. Oh, hold on, because let's see, 1 second, get my link. So in the chat, so I'll go back here. Okay, so if you click on this link in the chat, hopefully it will take you to this. And I'll see if people, you can still see my screen, if people are clicking on this. And if this does not work, I have another thing I can pop in the chat. So it looks like it's just me on here though. So if you want to go ahead and try to click that link and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we will figure out. And then I can't see anybody, so I just need somebody to let me know if it works. Does not work. Takes you to a sign-in page. Okay, so we're gonna do it a different way. All right, so you won't be able to write on sticky notes. Okay, no worries, because it was made off of my Zoom account, so I wasn't sure if it was gonna work. Okay, so here is, make sure you have access to this. Anybody with this link, hold on one second, can view it, perfect. Okay, so what I just put in the chat is the gallery walk. So I'm gonna give you a few minutes and you can just click through, and there is stuff across New York State. So it's not just Rochester area. So if you're not from the Rochester area, you might find a few other things across New York State. But let's take about, I'd say 5 to 7 minutes and just pick about 3 or 4 of these. And then just as you're looking at them, just comment in the chat. What are you noticing or wondering for the difference? So you can say like slide 1 or something like that, and then tell me what you notice and wonder there. And then we'll do that way. Does that make sense to folks? Let me stop sharing for a second. Awesome. So again, so if you click on that document I just put in the chat, it'll just show you a slide deck. And so just in the chat, as you're looking through, pick 3 or 4 pictures and just jot down what you notice or wonder about that image, or any questions that are coming up when you look at some of this information. If we were in person, I'd have you up and walking around the room, but we're gonna attempt technology here. Awesome. Yep, so just jot down anything you're noticing, anything that's popping up. Like if you're looking at the first one, you know, anything you're noticing about the routes, things like that. And then what I can do is I'll share my screen and then I'll kind of just click through them slowly. Yep, I could do that. I gotcha. So I'll show my screen and I'll just kind of like click through each one. But you can also go on your own and just kind of look on your own. So if you want to jot down anything that you notice or wonder about these, you can do that. And in about a minute, I'll go to the next one. So as I'm putting these up, if there's anything that you notice or you want to pop in the chat about any of the slides, feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. So again, anything sticking out to you, you want to pop in the chat, any notices or wonders or questions, or feelings, any feelings that are coming up as you're looking through those slides on your own or with us together. So if folks are looking on their own at some of these slides, we'll take about 2, 3 more minutes and then we'll come back to the Zoom screen together. For the folks that are with me on this one, I will click to the next one. Mhm. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing in the chat. Really appreciate that. Mm, awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you for. Mhm. Thinking about how some of these policies you're seeing today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. So we could take about one more minute and then we'll come back together because I see folks are still in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. Hmm. Yeah, Darnell. I was just watching something recently, Darnell, that talked about people in Louisiana like that were still enslaved up until the 1960s. Because they didn't have TVs, they didn't have, and they were illiterate. And so they were sharecroppers, but the way that the person, anytime they tried to leave, like they would catch them and like bring them back. It was horrifying. Mm, yeah, Casanova. All right. So let me come back to that Zoom screen. These are awesome. Thank you so much for just everything in the chat that you've been sharing. And then any feelings that are coming up too. I know some folks are popping in different feelings as they're going through these slides, but I just wanted to give you just a little bit of thinking, our like instructional thinking behind some of the slides that we put there. Thank you for sharing those feelings. And so for this, we wanted, if you notice, like the different slides are scaffolded. So some of them have like a lot of words and some of them are like very, very few, or you'll just see an image on there. And that was really intentional. So because students get to choose which source they go to when it's around the classroom. And so we wanted to make sure that it was scaffolded so they can they can read it on their own. And then what they'll do is on days 3 and 4 of the unit, they'll revisit a lot of these sources and dig a little bit deeper. So this is kind of just giving them like a little touch on, okay, here's what we're going to continue to talk about throughout our time together. But when we were building this unit, I had no idea that routes went to the South or to the Caribbean. Like that was new learning for me. And if you notice, the images that we put of people who were formerly enslaved are all of dignity. You're not going to see anybody in whips with chains with, those images of the backs that are all like, like front all messed up. Like you're not going to see that. Like we really wanted to make sure that we were telling students the truth about our history, but we're not traumatizing them. And so when we work with 4th grade students and we teach this unit in 4th grade, we took the language from, for example, this is from Thomas James's autobiography, but what we did is we lightly adapted the language, because if you see, it says he even hurt me. In his actual autobiography, it says he even whipped me. But again, we didn't want to traumatize 4th grade students. With 7th grade students, because the standards are pretty similar in 7th grade, we would probably have the actual language in there. But for 4th grade, we wanted them to know it was bad, but we did not want to traumatize students. So that was a little bit of our thinking of lightly adapting some of those images. This one's pretty painful. I saw quite a few people that mentioned this in here for a few reasons, right? So she was sold for $100 and some sheep, right? And so her value and worth is the same of animals. And then her son being sold at 5 years old. But what they find out the next day on day 3 is that she actually is the first African American in the United States to win a lawsuit, and she wins her son back. Now it takes many, many years before she wins her son back, but she actually does end up getting her son back. And so students will find that out. So like if we have students that have some big feelings about this because they have, younger siblings that are around the same age. You can, we encourage teachers to let them know, like, hey, let them know tomorrow they're going to be, they'll find out a little bit more about her story. Always have to have Harriet Tubman. She's just the OG. You got to have her in here, and just how tough and strong she was. And if you'll notice, we always try to pair with how close it is, because our unit was created in Rochester, but as we adapt it, we show how far it is from wherever the local New York area is that we're in. This one kind of blew my mind when I thought about that over half of our senators were enslavers. So these folks were creating these laws, and this did not disqualify you from holding public office if you were an enslaver. So this didn't disqualify you. I'm sorry, I was laughing at something in the chat. But then even thinking about this, so those same folks on this screen were making these laws, right? So they could have freed people who were enslaved in 1799, but because their pockets were getting fatter and fatter, they decided to hold people for another 28 years. So even children that were born, they could have freed those children, but they decided to keep them enslaved until they were almost 30 years old, so they can continue to generate wealth, for themselves. And so just thinking about the power dynamics here, right? So this wouldn't just be something that is like someone being racist. This is a racist policy that's in existence here, and helping students understand the power differential there. It's not just, oh, I don't like you because of the way that you look. It's like, no, these folks were making laws and they had power, and they were also making money on it too. Absolutely. Or that our city was named after an enslaver. Our county, we used to be Ontario County. When James Monroe was in office, the folks in our county thought that he was such a great person, and they decided to change our county in Rochester from Ontario County to Monroe County. That at one point, we had over 20,000 people enslaved in New York State. Again, this is something that I never learned. And this is something that we worked with a social studies professor over at SUNY Geneseo. And she told us that you can't just always tell the exceptionalist stories. I think when we have really hard topics that we always want to highlight the heroes. But the reality is every single day, people fought back against these inequities, but they didn't always win. And so it's important for students to see that you may have a big problem that you see, and you may get together with your friends and you may fight for it, and you may not win that first time, but that doesn't mean that you give up. That doesn't mean that you quit because you don't win. So we wanted to make sure that we balance the story a little bit for students where, people didn't always win when they fought back, but that doesn't mean that we don't fight back. Or the fact that Nathaniel Rochester, before he came and purchased the land for Rochesterville, he was a sheriff in Maryland, and he would hunt freedom seekers, and he would sell them at his own personal profit. And so this was an ad that he put in the paper in Maryland with this woman, Agnes, and he didn't even know if she was enslaved or not, but still caught her. And then we actually found another newspaper clipping from later on where Agnes escaped from this jail that she was in and ran again. So we don't know what happened to Agnes, but we know that she was not going to just give up easily, regardless of what happened. Or that not everyone was enslaved. So Asa Dunbar was one of our first Black settlers here in Rochester. He was finally commemorated in 2019. You see there's a plaque that's being put up. But that not everybody was enslaved. And so making sure, again, we're telling a little bit more of the story. And then if you're not from the Rochester area, we have a few other pieces. So like from Westchester, thinking about Phillipsburg Manor and how there were people that were enslaved here. Or J.W. Logan. We've been in Syracuse quite a bit, thinking about the Underground Railroad and what was happening there. Different freedom seekers, Isaac Wales, and thinking about he actually ended up buying his freedom. And he would actually, it was pretty like what he had to do, but he would build like the outhouse vaults, so like the sewage things, but that was how he made his living to gain his freedom. Or people that were enslavers in different areas. So this is more the Onondaga, Madison, Cayuga County area. AME Zion Church also in Broome County, and also a spot on the Underground Railroad. You got David Cooper, who escaped from enslavement in Sodus, New York, and this is some of his family members here, thinking about the historical marker that was put up for him. Or that Congressman Robert Rose, he actually created a Southern plantation in Geneva, New York, right? And thinking about Rose Hill Mansion, which I think now is like a museum or something that people can go and take tours on, but thinking about the history of this place as well, or thinking about even in Albany, the bill of sale for someone who was enslaved and Rensselaer being the person that owned them. All right, so thank you so much for sharing this with me. And I just want to show you, so what we do with students after this is, I'm going to stop share for 1 second so I can pull this video up for you. We have them watch, because oftentimes students are like, but why? Like, why was there enslavement? Why are certain people enslaved? Like, what was the reason for this? And so we show them this quick little video. Let me enable my sound. Okay. Ready. Make sure I've got closed captions. Perfect. All righty.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you were of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the US needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
Righty. That again. All right, so we're gonna do this as just like a waterfall. So one of the questions that we normally ask kids is, like, what are you feeling? What are you starting to feel? But I just want to know, what was one source that you learned today that was maybe new learning for you? What did you learn about enslavement and how people resisted in New York State? So start typing in the chat. We'll all hit enter at the same time. Oh, you're fast. Hold on. Hold on. So start typing in the chat any new learning for you today, and any of those sources that we looked at. We'll all hit enter at the same time. We'll do this as a waterfall. So take about another 30 seconds Any new learning about enslavement and how people resisted? Hold on. Not yet. Let's think about 10 more seconds. All right, 3, 2, 1, go ahead and hit enter. So many routes. Rochester named after an enslaver. Majority of senators and other politicians were enslavers. How widespread and how long it lasted in New York. The statistics. Yeah. So much, yep. There was so much new learning when we wrote this unit a couple of years ago that I was just like, how come I didn't learn this? Like, I just felt like I was cheated of my education, and it was just like, why am I just now learning this in my 30s? There's an actual reason that you didn't learn this too. It was very intentional. Oh, learned about some new folks. Okay. Yep, so I'm gonna share the slide deck for the last video so you can rewatch it. Yep, I can pop that in just a little bit. It's just hard to do it with the webinar, but I'll make sure that Barbara has all the links for that as well to share out. I just want to check in, how you feeling? So we don't have to do this as you don't have to wait for me to say enter. This is something we do with students. So this is called zones of regulation. So just checking in with what zone or zones you're in right now. And so feel free to either let me know color wise, and you can be in more than one zone. Oh, and you learned that in California. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So just want to know, which zone or zones are you in right now? After learning some of this information about enslavement in New York State, I see some 3s and some 4s, or some red zones, some yellow, and you can be in all the zones if you want. Yeah, I see some yellows and reds. Yeah, real depressed and mad about this, a little worried. 3 and 4s. Thank you so much for sharing this. Feeling like this is healing work, being able to talk about some of these things. A little embarrassed. I was definitely embarrassed that I didn't know this and I was a teacher for so long. So I'm with you with that. And I just want to point out this quote while folks are popping how they're feeling in the chat right now, from Frederick Douglass. It says, "Where there is no struggle, there is no progress." Right? Like, it's okay to have feelings. And I know oftentimes there's all this stuff out in the world right now about making kids feel guilty about learning this. And that's never our goal, right? It's for a kid to feel guilty about anything that they're learning. But what we do is we do make space for kids to have feelings. If you are upset, if you are angry, like, we can take those big feelings and we can do something about it. That can help push us towards action. If I feel some big feelings about things that I don't like, well, what do I want to do about it? How can I feel empowered? Frederick Douglass had some big feelings about what was happening to him. And this is the way we frame it for kids. He decided to do something about it. He decided to fight back. Right. So we get to take our feelings and we get to decide what to do with those. Yes, we work with a lot of schools, actually. And we could talk about that. So any questions that you have about this, please don't forget to pop that in the Q&A. I'll be wrapping up in just a minute, and then we'll open it up for any questions that folks have. And then what I want to do, and what I want to know with you all, and actually, since we have a few minutes, I'm going to switch this up a little bit, and I'm going to show you one more piece of our curriculum. So the next day with students, so that was days 1 and 2 of the unit. And I just want to show you one more small piece of our next day. So interesting, Peggy, we actually went to Long Island one time and we have not been invited back. So I'd love to talk to you more about that, because I would love to come. All right. So this is our day 3, where we focus on having students read a little bit more from folks who were enslaved in New York State. And they get to read an excerpt from 2 different folks' autobiographies. And so vocabulary again. So they have an opportunity to read from Austin Stewart, an excerpt from his autobiography, and then an excerpt from Sojourner Truth's autobiography. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly read the excerpt from Sojourner Truth, so you'll kind of find out the rest of the story a little bit. And then what we have students do is they each take a critical superhero role, and then they get a chance to read through the document a second time, but through a different superhero lens. So like you have the credible Hulk. It says, is this document credible? Is it reliable? Can I trust it? Did the author have firsthand knowledge? You have Mr. E, get it? Mystery. What's the mystery? What's the purpose? You know, whose voice is missing here? You got Captain Context that asks the when and the where did this happen? Where did this take place? And then you have the main idea master that brings it all together, thinks about the gist, thinks about the details of and what the main idea of the content is. So I'm going to read this, and as I read from Sojourner Truth, I just want you to pop in the chat any words or phrases that stick out to you or any feelings that are coming up, and then we'll close out after this. So, adapted from the narrative of Sojourner Truth, a Northern Slave. Introduction. Sojourner Truth was born in the year 1797 in Hurley, New York. She was enslaved for approximately 28 years. When she was 10, Sojourner was sold for $100 and some sheep. She was the first African-American woman to win a lawsuit in the United States. As a child, she was enslaved and forced to work instead of attending school. In order to make her voice heard, she chose to have an ally, Olive Gilbert, write her story. All right. So as I read this excerpt, again, please feel free to pop in the chat any words or phrases that are sticking out to you or any feelings. One of Sojourner Truth's earliest memories was moving into a new home with her enslaver. The basement under the hotel was where the enslaved lived. This basement was so disgusting that Sojourner could not get this memory out of her head. The basement was cold and dark with just a few beams of light coming through a few small windows. Constantly being wet and breathing in unclean air was chilling and bad for their health. Her body trembles every time she thinks back to these memories and revisits the basement in her mind. Before Sojourner Truth left her old enslaver, he sold her young son, who was only 5 years old. He was sold to a doctor who planned on taking him from New York City to England. The doctor thought he was too small to work, so he was passed on to several other enslavers before he ended up with a wealthy enslaver in Alabama. Sojourner Truth was devastated and heartbroken at losing her son. She called on Mrs. Getney, the mother of the enslaver that sold her son, to help. Sojourner cried out for help in being reunited with her son. Mrs. Getney laughed at Sojourner, saying she would never see her son again. Sojourner paid a lawyer to take the enslaver to court and help her win her son back. She didn't give up, and they won. The judge ordered that Sojourner's son be returned to her. So thinking about the loss of a child, the basement like a dungeon, a few beams of light. Yeah, her actually winning a lawsuit, right? That she laughed at her, how awful, right? And especially if you have young children or grandchildren, like just thinking about the trauma for exactly, Peggy, or Peg, the trauma for the child as well, right? And thinking about, she found an ally. She was able to find a lawyer that was willing to take her case and help her out. And knowing, yeah, that she won. And thinking about her bravery, right? And thinking about if it was any one of us, we would go to the ends of the earth if something happened to our child to get them back, and thinking this is the same, for Sojourner. Even though she didn't have the means, she figured it out and she wouldn't give up. And she didn't end up getting her son back until he was like almost, I would say he was like early 20s, maybe. He was, I would say a young adult was how old he was by the time he actually came back. And the reason she won the lawsuit was because her enslaver, because that gradual emancipation, it was illegal to sell the enslaved across state lines. So because her enslaver sold her son across state lines, that was the reason, that was the loophole. And that's how she ended up winning the lawsuit and getting her son back. All right. So just want you to think about who's someone that you learned about or read about today that you just don't want to forget about. And I know it says a sticky note, but just in the chat, who's somebody that maybe you heard about that maybe inspires you to take action, to get in the way, to get in good trouble, like John Lewis says, good necessary trouble. So in the chat, feel free to mention anybody that you learned about or we talked about today that really encourages you not to give up, to get into that necessary trouble we need to get into. Sojourner, Logan, yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, her lawyer, Lewis, persistence, absolutely. All right. And then I will pop our website in the chat, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I know we've got about 15 minutes left. Um, so who's somebody that, or any questions that folks have? And do you want me to stop sharing, Barbara?
Yeah, maybe so.
All right. And I'll put our website in the chat right now.
So let me check the Q&A. So I get the sense that people are very interested to know where this stands as far as New York State curriculum. Like, right? People are just like, we gotta know this. And we had some questions before we started on, because I gave it the name, What Are Our School Children Learning? So tell us how that's going and what process you're going through.
Absolutely. So again, like I said, we've been a project for about 3 years. It was, I would say year one was probably like the toughest year. So we were in COVID. It was like middle of COVID. We started in 2020, excuse me, July of 2020. And so that was hard. There was a lot of folks that just were overwhelmed. They were afraid to teach it. There was a bunch of we had some school board meetings where people almost got into actual fistfights about our curriculum. They in the early stages, they put Shane's picture up on Facebook and his address and all this stuff. Like, it was pretty scary. We had a few protests outside of we had a small protest outside of one school, like one school in a school district we were working in. About 20 parents were upset, and they protested while our curriculum was being taught that first year. But then what we saw the second year is that teachers were self-centering because they were so scared. And so teachers were just like, they were afraid. They were afraid of being blasted on the news or on social media or things like that. And so we were seeing them starting to censor themselves. So we really started to continue to work with teachers and encourage them. We worked with school leadership. And so in Monroe County, where we work with 16 out of the 21 school districts. So we just have a few holdout schools that refuse to work with us. But for the most part, like, the majority of the schools not only work with us, but some have adopted our curriculum. And so it has to be taught in their schools. And then we have schools that we've been going back and doing trainings. This is our third year in, or we go in and we do multiple trainings throughout the year. And so in our area, it has been getting much more accepted. We're not getting pushed back the way that we used to. Like last year, we put a conference on a virtual conference. We had over 600 people that were on Zoom for a full Saturday. And then this year we did another conference. We had about 450 people on this year, of people who were interested in this. And we've really started to branch out to Syracuse, Albany. We just finished our Buffalo curriculum. And so our goal is this school year coming up to start piloting in Buffalo. So if you are interested and you're in the Buffalo area, if you can connect us, we would love that. That's going to be our next place. We're really starting to get a lot more business in Syracuse. We're getting called there quite a bit to do like full day trainings in different schools. Shane's going to be in Syracuse on Friday for a full day at one of their schools. And so it's starting to spread. There are still like some of those bills that are in place in lots of other states, but they're really not going to pass in New York State for the most part. We don't really see that happening too much.
Oh, there's a question in the chat. Anyone in Oneida County adopted this curriculum?
I don't know. Let me see where else Oneida is.
That's east of Syracuse.
East of Syracuse. We haven't. Let me see, because we've been doing a lot of work with BOCES. So it would depend on which BOCES that is. Oh, Oneida, Herkimer, Madison. Yeah, so we've been in Madison County. We did Madison, Oneida. Yeah, so we did a full day training out there. But we'd love to come back if there are more folks that are interested. And again, I put our website in the chat, and all of our curriculum is on our website. It's free, it's open source. There's no passcodes or anything. Anybody can access it. And then we just finished a documentary, and that will be on our website, hopefully within the next month or so. It's about a 21-minute documentary that talks about racially restrictive covenants. And like through the lens of two families in Rochester.
Mm. So you've mentioned Buffalo and Syracuse. Is it going into the suburbs there as well as the city schools?
That's our hope. So our hope is to like integrate all of these schools if we can, and really kind of do like a train the trainer model, because it's pretty much like Shane and I, and then we have like one teacher that can work part-time. Most of our teachers are full-time teachers that work in schools, and so they can't really take time off like that. And so for us, it's just really being able to help train folks in, you know, these areas that have a little bit more knowledge, you know, so we're outsiders that are just coming in and doing our own research, but people that are from, you know, Buffalo or Syracuse, they know so much more about the history. And so we definitely are looking to, you know, get a few more folks on board and kind of do this train the trainer model. So there's champions in those cities that are I don't want to say experts, that's not the word I want to use, that are just a little bit more proficient in the local history, is our goal. Mhm.
And I don't know how curriculum's done in New York State. Is this something where the State Department of Education should be getting in there and making this part of some, do they prescribe social studies curriculum like this?
So it's different for schools. They can't mandate. I don't believe they can mandate a curriculum. So we have been meeting with Chancellor Young, who is the Chancellor of Education for New York State. And so, and when we met with him about a year or two ago, he really just asked us to focus on our model, you know, and how can you actually replicate this in other areas. So that's what we've been focusing on for the last year, is how do we adapt and replicate it. But I don't know if it can be like mandated or forced to be taught, because I know in local schools, like we have definitely local districts, like our CSD has adopted our curriculum, and so it should be taught. It's in their scope and sequence. It's called like scope and sequence is kind of like what we call like what you should be teaching. And so in multiple suburban schools in Rochester also have adopted the curriculum, and it is mandatory for it to be taught. So it really depends on the school district and what they decide to adopt.
And what about New York City? Have you penetrated there?
So we haven't yet. We are New York City vendors though. So if you are in the New York City area, we're officially in the system. So you can work with us if you want to. It's just such a big space. And so there's one person I've been meeting with we have a meeting coming up in the next month or so. She works for New York City Education Department. I don't know the acronym for that. But we can. It's just really about what school or what area, and then giving us time to do some of the research, because we want to be as local as possible depending on where we're going. Well, we would definitely love to. Did we do West? We went to, I think it was Westchester. We went one time and they wouldn't even say the word segregation. Like they would not say that the area was segregated. We couldn't say the word racism. Like there were so many things that like we couldn't say. And so we went there and we did like a 30-minute.
So they told you in advance before you came not to use those words?
Yeah, we had to use like, and this was through like, I think it was like one school. Somebody saw us at like a BOCES and they wanted to bring us to their school. And so we did like a 30-minute staff meeting or something like that. And they were just like, nope. Like kind of similar to what we did with you all, Barbara, which we'll do next week, a zoom in, zoom out, but it was different information on that zoom in, zoom out. And they just would not. They were like, nope, like we don't want to talk about it. So it's interesting.
All right, so we're getting a whole bunch of questions like, what can we do and how can we help? And how can we contact you to get this in our school district? And so can you just blue sky, like now you've got a bunch of people all over the state who really love this. So what needs to happen?
I would say I'm putting our emails in the chat right now. So if you all have folks that are connected to schools, please, if you want to introduce us, whether it's a school board member, whether it's a principal, maybe a teacher who's super into it, administrator, we try to start with at least like the administrators, just to make sure that they're on, you know, like this is something that they're looking for and they will support their teachers, right? Like that's the biggest thing, is the teachers having the support. And so if you have like superintendents or assistant superintendents of instruction, an ASI is kind of what it's called. If you know any of those people and you want to connect us via email, go ahead and I would definitely do that and just say, hey, went to this great training, this awesome facilitator, and just you'd love to connect us. And then we can send over information there because we have our curriculum, but then we have other offerings as well. And so we do things around like emotional resiliency for educators. We do how to respond to harmful comments or racist remarks by calling people in and not calling them.
I am just in awe of how you do it.
What we've been seeing it is as we're getting feedback, teachers are like, we need this, right? We need this support. And so we've been trying to build that in so that there aren't barriers in the way of actually teaching this history. And really,
I can understand that a teacher who doesn't know a lot and hasn't been taught very deep knowledge and has always avoided awkward situations would be afraid. I see that.
absolutely. And so that's one of the things I work with educators on is it's okay to be a learner in this space with your students, because oftentimes we didn't learn this growing up. And so this is new learning for us as a teacher. And so being transparent with your kids and saying, you know what, I'm still learning this as well. And you may have some questions that I don't know the answers to, but we can figure it out together. And so just taking the pressure off of yourself as the educator to be the expert, to know all. You don't have to do that. You're the facilitator, right? You're saying, wow, that's a great question. Let's put that on our wall and let's see if we can get closer to answering that question as we get, further and further into the unit.
And I love the way that was built in from the very first, right? Shane said, I don't know. I'll try to find out something. That has been the spirit throughout. Right. Let me, all right. So we got questions. How are you funded? Do you want to comment on that?
Yep. So we are grant funded. And so pretty much all of the local foundations in Rochester fund us. So like Rochester Area Community Foundation, ESL is one of our biggest partners, Rochester Greater Health Foundation, Farish Foundation, Wilson Foundation, William and Sheila Konar Foundation, United Way. And so those are our funders in the community. And so they've been funding us for the last 3 years. And we're hoping to continue some of that funding and they take care of our work in Rochester. So as we move outside of Rochester, then we do consulting contracts. So if we're coming to a BOCES that's outside, then we'll build a contract because our grants don't cover that. But our grants do cover all of the Monroe County in the 9-county area. So like Livingston, Geneseo, all that. And so when we go to schools, we don't charge them. Like they don't have to pay us for any trainings because of funding. And so that takes care of, Shane and I being out of the classroom and then anything else that we need for the program. And so that was another thing that we didn't have a hurdle to jump over in the beginning was like, you don't have to pay us. Like we just have some really good stuff and we just want to have time and opportunity with your teachers.
It feels like you might need to build a bigger organization. I gotta
say. We do. We need more. So we definitely need, our goal is to hopefully get some national funding coming up. So if folks have heard of the book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, him and his daughter have a new book coming out called Just Action. And our project is actually featured in it. So on June 3rd, their book is being released and then we're bringing them to Rochester with PathStone. PathStone's bringing them to Rochester and we're supporting their visit on June 5th. So they'll be kind of talking about their book. So our goal is to hopefully get some national funding so we can build a bigger team of full-time folks with us and then really be able to move across New York State or eventually across the country. I would love to be able to do work all across the country, but we just need more folks to be able to work with us.
And when I think about the way you support teachers after they start, which is so important, like you're just going to need to replicate yourselves 100-fold to be able to begin to touch all the people who need this work.
We do, because we offer coaching, to the district leaders, to teachers that need support. We've gone in and we've co-taught, with teachers if they need a little bit more support. So yes, we are here as like a full encompassing organization.
All right. So I want to point out to everybody that I have put a link in the chat to an evaluation. We would love to get your feedback on this webinar. It starts out https:/forums.gle. And there's a lot of people really wanting contact information and stuff. So I'm going to put that in the email that I will send out with the link to the recording. And I will make sure that the chat gets saved and circulated as well.
I just put that in the chat. So our project is called the Antiracist Curriculum Project. And I co-direct the project with Shane Wiegand. So he and I lead the work together. And our website, I'll pop that back in the chat. You can contact us. And again, Barbara will have my email in there. So if you want to connect Shane and I to any school district in your area, and we don't just work with schools, we work with all the local schools of education in Rochester as well. We work with local businesses, organizations. We pretty much faith-based organizations. We work with anybody that's going to face the community. We come in and we will do work and kind of do a training with them so that they understand a little bit more about the local history and why our community looks the way it looks currently. And so thank you so much for being here.
And I can't wait for next week because
Yes.
there's so much interesting stuff to learn there as well. I hope everyone can make it back.
Thank you. And so next week, we're going to push forward about 80 plus years, and we're going to dig into some redlining. So definitely want to be here next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you for spending this time with us. And Barbara, anything else you need from me?
Well, I'm just trying to, there's a lot of questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to review some of them. So I guess people are really curious about the opposition. Like who is this opposition? Are they real parents in real school districts? Are they somehow, because I keep hearing things like they're agitators being directed from outside the state. I had lunch with someone from a BOCES and he said, the people outside the state who fund those people don't know what a BOCES is. So we're not getting the kind of stuff that the school districts are getting. And you've been at it several years. Have you made converts among those who were initially skeptical and resistant?
Yeah, so the crowd that we serve that has usually the biggest pushback is realtors. And so we do trainings, bi-monthly trainings with realtors in Rochester. Like Shane and I are official New York State realtor trainers. And we've adapted our curriculum to help realtors understand their role in redlining and how that happened. And so they usually feel personally attacked. Like that one, I always have to meditate before that training just to get my system ready because I already know the pushback and the way that like they take it very personally. And so usually like teachers are pretty kind. And usually teachers are like, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for something of substance that I can like, and I feel like I can go in and I can do it the next day. But yeah, they usually have a lot of pushback. They feel like we're personally attacking them. But what is different with our work when it comes to like DEI stuff is that we don't come in and like, you're a racist and you need to know you're a racist and you're this horrible person. We truly are like, it's inquiry, we're going to put some primary sources. And what do you think? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Just the way that I did our enslavement unit is how we teach all of our units, where it's really, you get to bring yourself in here. You get to bring the questions that you have. And then we collaborate in our learning together. We construct our thinking together as we draw our conclusions. But, and oftentimes, like, especially with realtors too, by the end, they're like, oh, this was the best training I've ever been to. Oh my gosh, I learned so much. Oh, I realized I did benefit from some of these policies. I didn't understand that. And so because we put facts in front of people and actual like real history, there's not a lot you can argue with, about like this actually happened here. And here's the proof. And so
if I'm not mistaken, you've actually gotten some funding from both realtors and banks that benefited who now see.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So ESL is one of our biggest supporters, and they actually benefited from redlining. Every local financial institution in Rochester benefited from redlining, but they're one of the few financial institutions that are actually owning their history and doing something about it. So they've been funding our project for the last few years, and they've been doing a lot of different other initiatives in the community to try to redress some of the inequities that have been caused there.
And the Farish Foundation too. I mean, they were slumlords, right? So
Max Farish, he actually denied Dr. Cooper, who was in the beginning slide. He denied him a mortgage because he was Black. And they've been funding us for the last few years as well. Again, just redressing and owning some of their history. So that's been like a really beautiful thing to see, that it's not just a small group of people, but truly our community has said, this is our history. We're going to own it and we're going to do something to redress it.
And I'm gonna hold back from sharing it, but there's a beautiful example of what communities do when they learn this history that we'll talk about next week after.
We will, because I didn't get to talk about Benita, but I will talk about her next week. And that's one of the student activism projects that I want to share with you all.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
All right, I think it's time for us to call this to a close. So everybody feel free to share this with all your friends and get them to come back next week and hear more.
And then real quick, I'll put this, and I should have put this in earlier, but that's a link to the slide deck. And I'll also email that to you as well, Barbara, but that's the slide deck we just went through. So if you all want to take a look or dig in or watch that video again, you can take a look at that as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, Kesha, for being here with us again. We love having you with us.
And I'll see y'all next week, same time, same place.
Yes. Okay.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.